So we've got to move away from the Brexit theme, but Brexit has dominated the news for as long as anyone can remember. But isn't it time we stopped talking meaningful votes and started having meaningful conversations about the real national crisis? This year, there have been 100 killings, including 41 stabbings in the UK. Public concern has grown so deep that it's wiped out the Conservatives' reputation as the party of law and order. Only 1 in 4 people now think the Tories are the best for dealing with crime. That's the lowest in 14 years. From the right, commentators have criticised Theresa May's decision to reform stop and search. From the left, pundits focus on austerity and historically low police numbers. This game of political ping-pong has been on display most visibly between London's mayor and the Home Secretary. In truth, there is no one quick fix to the problem. Intelligence-led police searches, more bobbies on the beat for community policing, absentee fathers, the role of school expulsions, and reimagining our failing war on drugs must all be considered. As perhaps in Glasgow, the public deserves a comprehensive approach. The only ones getting off scot-free when politicians play the blame game are the criminals.
This is a catastrophic situation, Maajid, and I think the only silver lining is that it is being taken seriously by the political establishment. I personally wish it hadn't taken this number of young people dying before we have it being described as a national emergency, before we have the Prime Minister speaking about it, before we have a task force being assembled. We've now had the Chancellor announce an extra £100 million for the police, even though the government still doesn't admit that underfunding of the police and austerity has been part of the problem in the first place, which for me is just logically nonsensical. But I think I still have a few issues with the way this debate is being carried out. I'm very interested in the public health approach that was adopted in Scotland, but I don't know how much people understand it. And, for example, the former Deputy Mayor of London, Matthew Ryder, has written about this, the fact that a public health approach actually requires more stop and search, more data collection, tougher enforcement. A lot of the people advocating it, I think, feel or assume that it's kind of a hands-off approach. It's not. And I think this goes to the deeper issue for me. There is a lack of trust in the communities affected by this and the authorities. The root causes of this, in my opinion, are relatively obvious. We have left poor areas to the exposure of organised crime that has exploited vulnerable kids who are not receiving an education that's interested in them. And we've always had problems of violence. We've always had problems of violence. Young men, disenfranchised young men, vulnerable young men, poor young men who've fallen outside the system have always been prey. They've always been prey to violent crime. We've never been interested in solving this problem in society, in my opinion. We haven't, and I would love to say that's changed now.
What's different this time?
A few factors are different. Social media is a massive factor. Music that I'm not familiar with, I think it's called drill. Drill music is a massive factor. The idea that you can live fast, get a lot of money and die young is a massive factor. They don't care. That's it. Suddenly they see someone on the street corner who's driving a BMW with fantastic-looking girlfriends or boyfriends or whatever it might be. And I think those are plays that I think are new and bring different situations in. And the elephant in the room in many instances is the breakdown of family units and too many absent dads and kids having kids.
Yeah, I mean, that was in my talk-up. But did you know, Nick, that the public, when surveyed, have just said that they put concern for knife crime now over their concern for NHS. It's second only to Brexit. Second only to Brexit.
And I agree, and I will yield. I think you're absolutely right. To find £100 million now is extraordinary, as they have. You're right, cut the money. But then they released £3 billion for a housing fund. Now, I'm not saying housing isn't important. Of course we should be having housing. But you make £3 billion available so you can build houses and £100 million available to stop kids stabbing each other.
Wow.
I don't know.
Magic money tree?
In a second, we're going to hear from a kid who saw another kid being stabbed. But just first, I want to back up what Afa said. There is obviously, as the head of the Met said herself, Cressida Dick, a correlation between the cut in police numbers by 20,000 since 2010 and the rise in knife crime and street crime. How could anybody argue there's not? Given the fact that bricks and mortar police stations are closing, we are not seeing policemen on the street in the same way. I mean, Michelle's are the doyen of common sense, but honestly, if I was Prime Minister, I would ban the sale of knives to anyone under 18. Like, you can't buy bleach anymore because of acid attacks. I would impose a knife amnesty. I would have bins on streets so you could put away your blades. But anyway, enough of me, because let's hear from somebody who's experienced this.
It was basically over a girl. It was over a girl, and then he didn't have a fight. He just ended up stabbing him. It was literally, I was right there, and I just saw a group of young boys all crowding in. And The boy was bleeding on the floor.
Well, I have nothing to say. It's
Michelle.
just terrible.
I think we need to make an important point as well, because I think sometimes people hear knife crime and they just think London. So I've just got a quick statistic to show you that actually, so since 2010, you've seen a rise in knife offences in London by 11%, but actually, much broader than that, English and Welsh counties, 45.7%. So that's the first point I want to make, that this isn't just a inner city, inner London thing.
Which is why it doesn't help where a lot of people are just blaming the London mayor.
Yeah.
You know,
No, absolutely.
fair.
I would probably counter that, though, and say that actually the increase is so small in London because it was already so rife in the first place. But, but what I would say is this public health approach, I was quite anti that originally, because I think it was in Glasgow or something, wasn't
Glasgow.
it?
It's been successful in
Yeah, no, but I was originally anti, or slightly anti it. And the reason that I felt slightly anti it originally was because I felt like it was almost absolving people of personal responsibility, which I disagree with. But the more that I've come to learn and understand this issue, it is, to your point, so deeply complex, so deeply... You've got children in primary schools with knives and knuckle dusters going to school, and often it's for prevention. Yeah. It's not because they want to fight, it's because they feel a need to protect. So if we look, there's an interesting guy, an anti-knife campaigner. I just bring him in because what I feel needs to happen is people from the communities that are affected by this need to be working much closer with the government to look at fixing, how do we fix this? Because it's so complicated. It's everything from lack of youth centres and lack of engagement with the youth in terms of what they can do, through to family things and money. Let's look at an anti-knife campaigner.
I've took 30 knives away, and each one, like, I give out £10 vouchers for. Like, I just walk into JD Sports, I say, you can have a £20 voucher, but I just buy loads of £10 vouchers because it's easier for me to split up. Do you know what I mean? And I was just writing a voucher to ? From Faz Amnesty and the price of the voucher, and I'd just be like, keep winning, keep changing.
You need people that these kids can relate to be working with these kids. If you get a posh, you know, guy walking in his suit going, hey, kids, today we're going to get you to put down your knives, they're going to go... I mean, come on, they are. And you need people that they can relate to inspire these kids to a different way of life.
To the complexity point that you made, does anyone remember playing that, I mean, maybe you a bit younger than us, SimCity, the game, where so you'd have this computer game called SimCity, and it was about allocating resources. And the minute you took the budget away from, say, the armed forces in the game and put it towards the police domestically, you'd see a foreign country about to invade you, and vice versa. The minute you took this money and put it there. And I think that's part of the problem, that we've got such a complex problem that involves absentee fathers, social media, police numbers, the 20,000. You know, all of that has to be addressed comprehensively.
So let's find out what is the government actually doing. Here's Crime Minister Victoria Atkins.
We in the Home Office are investing £220 million on intervention, both in the short term but also in the longer term, because we know these problems can arise. They can take time to arise, but we need to intervene as soon as we can to steer some of these young people away from the path of criminality.
Which speaks to the point you started with, which is cash, 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 Afua.
Well, it is cash, but it's also, I think, a cultural attitude towards what's happening in our poor areas. And if you speak to young men like the one we just saw on Sky News there, they will tell you that they live in violent areas where people have to be violent just to survive, where you're not respected if you don't learn to be violent. You've got kids who don't want to be violent, don't want to be armed, having to be because of the nature of the place they live in, and they feel left behind. Nobody has cared about what's going on in those areas. Their services have been taken away. There is a complete lack of trust between them and the authorities because of this feeling of neglect. I just want to show you Peter Chesney, the father of Jodie Chesney, who's one of the tragic victims of this recently, also outside of London. Just listen to what he says about his daughter, because this is what's really going on. And when you hear these personal stories, it really does bring it home.
She was the nicest person any of us know or knew. Everything about her was about being kind and good and thoughtful with others.
Even if she didn't want to do it, she'd do it for you.
And it's just there's just no way that you could do this to a nicer person.
I found that so moving and so tragic, but I would also like to say that I wish all of the children who are victims of this have been treated with the same dignity and sympathy, because I can't state enough how malign some of them have been in the media and portrayed as if they are criminals rather than child victims, which is actually what they are. So I hope that people will start to be more compassionate to all of the victims of this terrible situation.